We are here as promised with Reverend John Lewis for another wonderful session of Leadership Plus. Good morning to all our listeners in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, all our listeners in Trinidad and Tobago, and across the United States. Good morning. Reverend John Lewis is the director of the Grenada Institute for Theological Education. Good morning, Reverend, and how are you today?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me back. It's been a great morning so far, and thank you that we can continue on this series of Leadership Plus.
All right. So if you have questions and or suggestions that you want to make during the program, you can send them in on 403-1031, or you can participate on our YouTube stream. So moving right into today's discussion, we're talking about, what are we talking about today, Reverend?
Turn the ship around.
Turning the ship around. Could you enlighten us on what turning the ship around is about today?
Thank you very much. Just for a connection from last time, before we jump into that, last week we talked about canoeing the mountains, which is the leadership in turbulent times and how we can maneuver in the challenging times in which we serve. Today, this book is called Turn the Ship Around by author Marquet, and the author called us to action, to be willing to let go of past practices and behaviors that are archaic and unproductive. We are challenged to be creative and innovative in order to turn our lives and organizations around.
Okay, so could you define archaic for us? What does that mean?
Right, well, it's out of date, basically, outdated, and it doesn't do us any good in terms of holding on to things that are ineffective in terms of what we are accustomed to doing. And so he challenged us that we must change directions, particularly in the areas that are not productive. And unfortunately, sometimes we hang on to things for years and years in organizations, in the church, in government, in business. Just because we've been accustomed to doing them does not necessarily mean that they are productive. They are, of course, good practices that we have honed in on that are efficient and effective, and so we continue to improve on those, in especially the times in which we function today. It's a total different kind of world, an environment of service in every department of life and society and government and organizations.
Okay, so what are some of the signs that indicate that a practice or is unproductive or archaic?
Right. Well, of course, as we know, these are coming out of what we started out the series on personal and organizational assessment. And so as we indicated that every wise company, organizations, individual will do a personal assessment and organizational assessment so we know exactly where we are. For companies, whether we are making a profit, for a church, whether we are seeing increase in membership in our local church, in our organization, whether we're seeing growth and development at the personal level and organization level. So there are measurement tools for that, and we go back and look at the different tools that we mentioned before. For example, Peter Drucker's book, the 5 most important questions that every organization will ask of himself. And then we look at the models of the structures, the 4 structures: political structure, the organizational undergirdings that help us to function in terms of these. So different kinds of tools that every person and every organization should use to assess where they are personally and where they are as an organization. If we do not discipline ourselves for these kinds of challenging assessments, because the assessment has to be intentional. It is not just because we want to get over an exercise, but rather we are desirous of become better persons, better leaders, and so we are willing to look at the hard facts of where we are and how we can move on in terms of becoming a more productive individual as well as a more productive organization.
Right, so the leader must be in touch with himself, know who he is, where he's at, and his strengths and weaknesses. So I want to ask, can a leader know himself completely at one point, or is it a continuous journey? I think you will have alluded to that, but could you expound more on that?
Sure, it is a daily process of growth, and we become what we practice on a daily basis. We cannot practice different things in our lives and expect different results. So it is a daily growth path. We cannot say that we have done this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and expect that there is no growth. The same thing would happen to us. We become very concerned if after giving birth, parenting a child from baby, and after 5 years they're still crawling on the floor.
Right.
We will be very concerned about their personal growth, or they're not running or speaking. They have health challenges, but in a normal way, we expect growth, and in the same physical development that we expect from our children as they're born into this world, in the same way our own emotional growth, our own psychological growth, our own intellectual growth must constantly be stimulated so that we are better prepared to make a difference and to be men and women of influence in these times.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are chatting with Reverend John Lewis, and we're talking under the topic Turn the Ship Around.
One of the things that is fundamental to the concept is turning an organization around, turning a church around, turning a denomination around. But the primary fact is that we have to first turn ourselves around.
Definitely.
Yes. If we are not heading in the right direction, people will follow us. As a leader, whether you are in pastoral work, whether you are in business, whether you're in government, people assume that you're a leader and would tend to follow you. And so this is a great story of self-discovery. So we discover who we are in the first instance. The tension that we experience in our personal life, this is where we are, but this is not where we want to remain.
Right.
So there is a growth pattern. There is a desire to get out of some practices and habits that have not helped us. Sometimes there are self-doubts of the leader, that we are not certain of all the answers, and life is like that.
Yes, definitely.
We do not have all the answers and to the things that we want to do, but unless we become prepared when the doors open up and when the opportunities jumps at us, then we are ready to move. And second, the book provides the specific mechanisms they use in an experiment to achieve this transformation, and how it enables us to think about our own leadership and making the paradigm shift in our personal life and in our own levels of leadership and personal growth and development.
Right. So, as the leader, or comes in touch with himself and in tune on what it is to be a leader, and it comes to the point where there is a decision to be made. I noticed that the author said everyone should have a part in the decision making. Does that mean everyone, or is it a selected everyone?
Right. I mean, there are different models of leadership. We tend to refer to one as the top-down style leadership, where it is only from the management, and they give directions and they give orders, and you have to carry them out. And there are others that are participatory kind of leadership. They allow their government, they allow their congregation, they allow their business employees to participate in making decisions.
Right.
In that way, some companies have pushed the idea of a round table structure rather than a head of the table idea, so that everyone in the organization has a role in decision making. So a lot of organizations and businesses have created a round table structure where everybody sits around a table that is basically has the same kind of position of authority and influence around that table. And so we have to include people in our decision making. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that people have a sense that they are not valued for their contribution, for the ideas. And so this is all goes back to the whole concept of an appreciation for the human value that everyone brings to a company or to an organization. But sometimes that's a hard choice for leaders who have been brought up in a particular style of leadership, and he or she is not ready to make that kind of change or turn the ship around, but insists on carrying out the same roles and models of organization as we are accustomed to. So it calls us to take a hard look of how more effective or efficient we can be, rather than just keeping up, with the status quo, doing the same thing over and over again, and realize that we are not heading anywhere.
Right. So how often should a leader look to turn his ship around? Is it upon recognizing that we're practicing something that's archaic and we need to get it rid of? Is it at that point, or is it something that should become a common practice? We do it regardless, we're always looking to turn things around?
Well, as you have observed, most businesses do a stock taking on evaluation at least once a year. And that's a minimum that every leader should do. A weekend, a retreat, have a team of people assessing you, and it is not just you making all the decisions, but having an honest evaluation. So you're inviting trusted people around you, people with the skill, knowledge how to do an accurate evaluation, and it may be uncomfortable. They may show up some of your weaknesses, or some of your weak points and how you function, and sometimes that's not easy to swallow, because very often as individuals we are not comfortable when what and who we really are comes to light. But if we are honest about that evaluation and take it seriously, rather than being criticized, we take it as an evaluation, because these are trusted people and qualified people with a skill to be able to work you through. And great leaders do that all the time. The book Good to Great is a good example of those kinds of things, where a leader doing well as possible, but takes the time to say, look, I want to be a better leader. I want to increase my strength of influence, my sphere of work, and I'm willing to take the medicine, as it were. Sometimes the medicine is a bitter pill. So that's where the challenge really is. Sit down with your people and really listen, because that's going to take a lot of patience and wisdom to be able for people to put you through the grill, as it were.
Yeah. I
And
think once you have the
yes.
right perspective of is growth, you're looking to get to a place, and you have the idea that no man is perfect, and that we all have flaws. So you take time to work on it, and your flaw might not be mine. So we respect each other and give each other the space and the privacy to work on those flaws, to become better.
Absolutely. So that's one of the challenges of doing a serious personal assessment, and then secondly, an organizational assessment.
Right.
Some of the issues that is discussed in this particular book, Turn the Ship Around, is one of clarity.
Right.
If we're not clear in terms of where we are, where we want to be, and how to get from where we are to where we ought to be, it's fuzzy. The picture is clouded. And so we call for clarification. We ask the right questions. We ask those questions that Drucker talks about in his book on the 5 most important questions a leader would ask. And then in this exercise, there has to be a sense of trust, that I trust the people to be honest with me, and I trust myself to be transparent with them.
Right.
Because if we hide ourselves, they cannot have a true assessment of us. They would ask us the hard questions. They will ask us about our own life of integrity, of honesty, of our sense of morality, how we deal with finances, how we deal with our families, our children, how do we respond to when there is a crisis. And so there has to be a sense of trust on both sides of the coin, as we would say. And then it talks about legacy. What do you want to leave as a legacy? We are in a very interesting class on GITE at this moment, where Dr. Stan Lubeck, an excellent coach for pastors and other leaders, business and civic leaders, is guiding us through how do you work toward leaving a legacy, a legacy that is going to last. And so we not only think about now and the present moment and what may be comfortable, but think about the next 10 years, 20 years as life may last us. But what is the legacy that you want to follow you? What is it, like Bob Buffett asked in his book, in Halftime, what is it you want to be written on your tombstone in one sentence, if possible? And so we understand that legacy would be the kinds of things that we invest in today. So we invest in this aspect of our own personal growth, and we're able to pass them on to the next generation. Another aspect of this book is understanding the questioning and self-control, key concepts in the book. Self-control, how do we manage ourselves in our thinking? Generally, people they can't see what we're thinking. They hear what we're thinking when we express them in words, of course. But what is our thought pattern? Because from a biblical perspective, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And generally, what we think about is what we will do. So we can see the result of a person's thinking by the actions, by what they become involved in, what are they passionate about, what do they invest their money in, what do they invest their time in, where do they spend the hours, because that would give you a clue in where their heart is or where their mind is. And people will give the extra time, and they give of the extra finances, give of the hours of longer working time, because they are passionate about this particular area of their own lives. So we have to understand what really drives us, what really motivates us, what causes us to wake up in the morning and to look forward to a new day in order to make a difference. What am I going to do today that will add value to people? because you must do at least one thing in your day to add value to someone else. Whether it's giving them a lift out to work, might be given calling them. A lot of people are isolated during these times.
Right. True.
We have been locked down for over a year. We are probably now getting a little bit more movement. But a phone call, without any request for help, just ask, how are you today?
Yes.
And be willing to wait for the answer.
Yeah.
Inquire about their welfare. So you add in value to people.
Right.
How can I help you today? Because that's what a good leader does. He continues to add value to people and to the people around him and the people in which he or she interacts. And that's part of the responsibility of being a good leader in these difficult times.
And essentially those traits, those behavior things, they form the character or the culture of the industry, the church or the business, whatever it is that you're a leader of. Your personal way of being kind and adding value will influence the culture of the organization.
Absolutely. So in following up to some questions that the author asks, he asks these penetrating questions that are critical for any individual organization. So one of the questions, what would you and your team like to accomplish? And write that down. If we don't know what we would like to accomplish as an individual, as a team, any road will take us to a destination if we don't know which path to be on. So if you want to get to a particular destination, you map out a plan.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to get from St. George's to Satiers in Grenada, you cannot go south.
No, that would be
You'll be dug at the airport,
Yes.
trying to catch a flight perhaps. So a particular part, and of course, there is the one where you could control your time.
Yeah.
Because some people could spend probably 2 hours to get there if they go around in circles. And some people could take 45 minutes to an hour because there's a particular part set out before them. So what would you like to accomplish in your life in the next 5 years or 2 years in terms of a short term, and then a medium term, 10 years, 15 years down the road? So we write those things down when we brainstorm with our team, and we put those in a written document and we circulate them. And so it's in front of you, on a daily basis or weekly basis for evaluation. And the other question that he asks in this intriguing book is, how can you as a leader help your people accomplish it? So the leader brings his people along him. He's not a lone ranger, as we indicated before. A good leader has a team of people that he guides, that he coaches. And coaching has become big business today. But we have business coaches, we have coaches in leadership, we have coaches as pastors and leaders. So how do we bring our people alongside us? If we are too far out in front of our people, of course the leader always is out front. But if we are too far out front in terms of the growth of our people following us, they may lose sight of us.
Yeah.
So we want to bring your people along. So that's why a good leader, a good company, a good church would provide training for personal growth and personal development for the people. It is not just my own personal growth and development. So that's why you provide seminars for them to participate in. If there is a relevant topic being advertised for training and development, you provide a scholarship from your company for them.
Right.
Because what it does for you as a leader in a business or government or church, it makes your company grow. It makes your church fulfill its purpose. So what is it that you're willing to invest in your people to help them accomplish their goal? When one succeeds and everyone succeeds, in terms of how we are willing to invest in them, in terms of how can you as a leader So it takes time to think through this, and you're dealing with individuals in the first place. So you're talking to individuals one on one, and of course that expands you into the larger team.
That was my question, my next question for, how much should a leader do for his company or church to facilitate growth? And you answered it already. So I should ask, maybe, is it that, that he constantly shows the organization or the church the need for growth, and, how the growth will influence meeting the objective as a body?
Yes. You cannot leave your employees behind, or your church membership in the religious sense, or your team behind,
right,
and expect to accomplish great things.
Right.
Great things are accomplished by teamwork.
Yes.
Teamwork, as John Maxwell says, make the dream work.
Make the dream work. That's right.
So we constantly have to bring people alongside you in terms of accomplishing particular goals that you have for your company or organization. So that's a critical issue that we constantly have to keep in mind, that if you want to go far, you can go by yourself, but if you want to go the long distance,
right,
you have to bring people along with you. And the other question he asked in this book, are you doing everything you can to make tools available to your employees to achieve both professional and personal goals? We touched on that. What are you doing to make your people, both professionally and grow personally, within your organization, within your church, within the leadership of your companies? And the other question that he posed is, are you unintentionally protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior? Now that's a difficult question. So good leadership is willing to confront behaviors that are not acceptable within the organization.
Right.
Particularly so in the church, because the church is expected to be a place where people are held accountable for the behavior. Of course, companies as well. So are you avoiding the conflicts that are existing right before your eyes, and you're just kind of closing your eyes and hopefully it will get away? So when it comes to conflict, there are two responses, as we all know. We fight, we confront the issue and we deal with it and move on, or we flight.
Right.
In the flight mode, we run from it.
Right.
And some of us have one of those two responses, whether it's in our family settings. Some of us would confront and we deal with it. Some of us would run away from it. But you totally never get to run away from these, because they come back to haunt you later on. So how do we sit down and in an environment of trust and openness that we deal with the issues? Because issues don't go away. Problems, you just don't think them away, and hopefully what it does, it compounds the issue, and it becomes blown out of perspective later on. So how we deal with, because every leader will experience conflict in the it's just a part of life.
Yes.
One of the courses and classes and books that we have completed is a book called When Christians Clash.
Right.
Some people may think, well, Christians shouldn't be clashing, but you're still living in an earthly frame.
Remember John Mark and Paul? Is it Paul?
Right. So Peter and Paul clashed over the issue of the Jews and Gentiles, even there in Scripture, much more outside of the scriptural world or biblical framework. So good leaders address the issues and do not confront the person in the sense of a confrontation with the person, but rather with the issue or the problem.
Right, and how it affects meeting the objectives or the standards and so on.
Sure. So very often, if we are not skilled in conflict resolution or conflict management, we tend to confront the person, and it becomes an affront to the person rather than to separate the person from the issue, and this is the issue we're dealing with. and we deal with the issue, and then we handle the solutions to this problem. So these are challenging questions. What would you and your team like to accomplish? So you have to sit down with your team and work on this together. How can you as a leader help your people accomplish it? Ask your people what they need. Very often as leaders we tend to assume that these are the needs of your people without any questioning. Or sometimes we may provide for them things that they don't need at all.
This is it. Okay.
They can handle those things. Because you have not asked what are their needs. And you may invest in things that you presume that your people need. And it's a waste of resources because they probably have those things already. And so we ask, what is it that you need? How can I help you? How can I add value to your life? And then the other question, are you doing everything you can to make tools available to your employees, to your membership, to your employees, to achieve both professional and personal growth? In our context as well, your spiritual goals. What are your spiritual goals as well? Because as pastors, as leaders, what goals have we set as leaders, pastors, bishops? It depends on your title of your denomination or congregation. What are your own personal goals, and how do we achieve those? And then, are you unintentionally protecting people from the consequences of their own behavior? And then the author takes the bull by its horns, as I would put it, or more appropriately, takes the wheel of the ship of leadership and turns it around. He dismantled the safe and comfortable ways of doing leadership and initiate provocative ideas. He believed that everyone in an organization should have their say in decision making. He is of the opinion of building the ship while sailing it, something that looks unsafe and reckless sometimes. So we're not projecting a completed version of a well-oiled organization. Things break down once man builds it. Yes. And so we have to repair. It's either we're going to repair in the process, or that we suffer the consequences of greater harm or damage to the company or organization. So we look for the weaknesses, and the moral and spiritual values he enunciated are integral to successful leadership. As Christian leaders, the spiritual values are integrated in our lifestyle as well. The analogy of a man without self-control is like a ship without a rudder or without a sail in some cases, without a steering wheel, or now without some method of control. And so in the same way, it goes back to your own personal self-control in terms of managing the direction of the analogy is of a ship sailing, but sailing in the right direction. That's where we want to direct the ship. And of course, you've been on ships, you've been in sailing. I remember as a boy, growing up in in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly in the Grenadines, the sailors would use a term called tackling. And that is diverting the boat from going in one direction and taking the direction of where they want to go, because the wind would drive your boat once the sails are up, and they would bring down the sails, redirect the boat, make sure they're going north and not south, or east or not west, depends on where they were planned to go. So our self-control will tell us, we are going in the wrong direction. If we are out of control, we cannot provide leadership to others who are without self-control as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're having another informative discussion with Reverend John Lewis. And we're talking about turning the ship around. We were just touching the point on self-control and how important it is to leadership. Could you enlighten us a little further on self-control?
Great. So, just to make an analogy, very often we talk about time management.
Mm-hmm.
And time management is really self-management.
Mm-hmm.
No one has control over time.
Right.
Everyone in this world has equal time.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically it's how you control yourself in managing yourself regarding the time on the clock.
Right.
In the same way, it has to be an internal monitor for yourself. How do you monitor your internal clock, as it were, that says to you, take a self-check. Take a self-check where your thoughts are, where your mind is leading you, and where your actions may lead you. Our thoughts determine our actions determine behavior. We develop habits from constant practices of that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so we develop a character as a result of those behaviors.
Right.
And then that finally determines where we will end up, our destiny.
Right.
So it all starts in the mind or in the heart, as it were.
I see.
And so we have to guard our hearts. The precepts of God's words give light, enlightens our heart.
That's right.
The precepts of wisdom that comes from wise men in the book of Solomon, the Solomon who writes the book of Proverbs,
Yeah.
and all the wisdom literature found in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And when we align ourselves with those wisdom literature and teachings, it's a practice that will guide our thinking.
Right.
One of the practices of one of our great leaders who have passed away since, Dr. Billy Graham, his daily practice was to read 5 chapters in the book of Proverbs.
Right.
With that practice, he was able to read through the entire book of Proverbs every month.
Right.
That's the other way around. The book of Psalms, as a matter of fact, has 150 Psalms. And so he would read 5 chapters in the Psalms, or 5 Psalms per day. At the end of every month, he would complete the book of Psalms.
Right.
In the book of Proverbs, it is 31 chapters.
Yeah.
And you could read 1 chapter per day,
And in a
and
month.
every month that you
Excellent.
complete the book of Proverbs.
Proverbs, yeah.
And he would do that every day of his life.
Right.
Now, some of us think that's so hard to do. But it's amazing what wisdom comes from the writings of the psalmists
Definitely.
and the wisdom of the literature in Scripture. So that is one practice I would encourage all of us to become involved with. So it guides us for every sphere of life, whether it's your personal walk, your job, integrity, finances, raising children, being a good spouse, a husband, a wife. It just
all
covers the
things,
gamut about
everything.
debt and finances. It's amazing tool that we have, but sometimes just sits locked away in a book or now on the phone or on a gadget.
Yes,
Because it is
true.
now available
Yes,
that
everywhere.
we can scroll down on.
Yes, that's true.
So the moral and spiritual values are critical, and we are left with a lot of questions to think on. And the ability to ask the right question is a necessary skill for all leaders. Asking ourselves the right questions will help us to find the right answers for personal life and for personal growth in terms of where we want to be. And this radical transformation in this book, as we would refer to as bucking the system and challenging the status quo, it is not always easy.
No.
And one of the chapters in our leadership training of Equip, it is a chapter is how to make a tough call. how to make a tough call when you as a leader has to deal with a difficult issue in your organization. And so we assess the situation honestly, truthfully, hopefully without any biases.
Right.
And we bring other people that can give us perspective.
Right.
Because very often we have a blind sight to us. All of
Yes,
us have a
yes.
blind sight to us.
Yeah.
And we cannot see everything in our own life. But there are people who, if I look at your life and can say, you know, look at this particular area
Right.
of your life and how can you improve on it.
Right.
So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, how do I acquire the necessary skills to ask the right questions?
Right.
And that takes research. It takes the desire to inquire and want to know. And the material is there. I mean, there's so many good and great books. And it's at our fingertips. And if we are willing and ready, if we seek it out, we will find it. And so the responsibility is really on ourselves.
Yes.
We really don't have any excuses to turn our lives around, to turn our organizations around, if we are serious about being an effective leader today.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, you are tuned in to Hope 103.1 FM, and we're talking about making changes, turning the ship around, and we've been having a good conversation so far with Reverend John Lewis.
One of the primary challenges of this book is we need to assess where our ship is going and evaluate the course on which we are heading. And when we do those assessment and do those stock-taking principles and have clarity about where we are, as you know, in every organization we would see this movement,
Right.
where we move up to the top, we get to the pinnacle of the chart, as it were, and very often we tend to plateau. We reach a stage within our own personal life or within this life of an organization
Yeah.
that, if we're not careful, plateaus. And if we are not creative and innovative, the article shows us, or the diagram shows us, that we're coming back down the hill.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we sense that we are plateauing personally, whether it's in our Christian faith or whether it's in the company,
Yeah.
we have to create a new plateau
Right.
so that there is a new challenge for the organization to go forward.
Right.
Unless we do that, it will just cause a decline, or we will descend into failure. We cannot remain too long on a plateau. You're bound to decline. So what is the new plateau that you are seeking to arrive at? The new plateau that you want to reach and achieve to.
Right.
And you have to determine where you are in your own cycle of your personal growth and the cycle of your company,
The company.
or your organization. Have we plateaued? Have we reached a point in our lives in the organization where we're just maintaining the status quo?
Right.
And we're doing the same things the same way over the last 10 years,
Okay.
15, 20 years.
So, while you're looking to create a new plateau.
A new plateau. Yes.
How do you assess that the individuals within the church or the company is able to go to a new plateau, or is it that we need new people. How do you determine? And if it is that you need new people, what do you do with those who may not be able to go to the new plateau?
Right. So that's called for the assessment methods as well. Some people are willing to make the change.
Yeah.
And they can move to the next one. If they do not have the capacity,
then growth must take
then
place.
what you find is that they may leave the organization.
Okay.
And sometimes you may have to ask them to leave as well.
Okay.
And that's the role of leaders,
Mm-hmm.
to determine where they want to take this organization, to take their church. And there has to be decision making at different stages within the organization.
Okay.
And then create this new plateau.
Yeah.
And look at the kind of opportunities we have as never before on the media, social platforms, to create plateaus.
Right.
There's no limit to where you can take your organizations in terms of the communication forums that you have, the tools of communicating.
Right.
There is no shortage of that today. And how we as organizations, companies, individuals utilize these methods of learning, equipping, growing as individuals and as organization to get to where we believe we ought to be. It's interesting that on the news today, I believe the two richest men in the world is on a competition to see who first gets out into space.
Bezos probably is in front, ahead.
That's the idea. So you see, these two men are now creating a new plateau for themselves.
Yes.
They have achieved the titles of billionaires. Or the two richest men in the world, and competing now for exploring the outer space.
Oh my.
In the same way, it may not be the ability to spend billions of dollars in a craft that will take you up there. But what is it that you're going to invest in to create a new plateau for your own growth and the organizational growth as well? And there's always a cost factor to it.
Of course.
And so we have to be willing to invest into it. Our time, it's going to demand time of you. Some of your trainings happen at midnight because of the different time zones around the world. And sometimes 2 a.m. in the morning because of the kinds of program that you're involved in. It's a global platform.
Right.
And everyone is not going to accommodate you to a 5 o'clock meeting or 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock. So willing to stay up late, to wake up early in order to benefit from some of the learning and involvement you can become a part of.
Okay. Well, I hope we've learned something today in our discussion. And we're wrapping up today, but before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you, are there any developments with the trip to St. Vincent?
Great. Well, it's just a matter of days now. So thank you for asking. We will leave on Monday, God's willing, and in preparation for the details that are involved in a group of 12 persons from Grenada, with an additional person joining us from St. Lucia. In the dates are the 12th of July, and the team will be involved until the 22nd of July. And so these are final days of preparation, and we request a lot of prayers for us. As you notice, the weather is uncertain. And this is the hurricane season. So we praying and trusting and believing that we will have a good weekend of good weather and preparation for travel. Continue to pray for the financial responsibilities that is still outstanding in some cases, and for all the final details in times in which we live. completing PCR tests,
Right.
meeting all the protocols for leaving Grenada, for entering St. Vincent. And so we covet your prayers and support over this weekend in a very particular way.
Yes, I pray for your safety and strength and God guidance with you across there in St. Vincent. I pray that you have a prosperous time and that you meet all the objectives that you do set out in that time of ministry.
Thank you very much. Just for contact, if you need to reach us, you can reach me at 420-1100, or you can send an email to miagrenada@gmail.com. It's not too late to give, and we look forward for your generous support for this challenging and creative way to help our sister island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Could you provide the banking information you gave last week?
Sure.
Yes.
So our account for the Grenada Institute for Theological Education is at the Republic Bank in Grand Anse and in St. George's, formerly the Scotia Bank, and the account number is 300-3576. That 300-3576.
All right, so that information will be posted on our YouTube link for today. So you can find the banking account, which is 300-3576. Again, we thank you, Reverend John, for being here. We would miss you next week, or we will try to link up again.
We'll try to keep in touch
Yes.
from out of St. Vincent.
Yes, that will.
Hopefully we could give you a live feed of what's happening on the ground.
I'm sure our listeners and viewers would appreciate that very much.
Thank
So
you.
we want to thank you again for being here today. And this was Leadership Plus for today, Wednesday, the 7th of July, 2021. God bless you and have a wonderful afternoon.